Hi, my name is Shanoa Wong, and for my country profile project, I will be investigating the extent of human trafficking in Thailand. To begin, Thailand is a country in Southeast Asia bordered by Myanmar, Laos, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Home to nearly 70 million people, Thailand is known for its plethora of tropical beaches, ancient ruins, temples, and palaces, making it a paradise for travelers from around the world. While Thailand does have a lot of beauty and attraction, there is also a very dark, not so glamorous side. Thailand is also a key hotspot for migrant workers, human trafficking, and forced labor. In 2019, it was estimated that Thailand was home to 3.9 million migrant workers, working and living there both legally and illegally. Most of them came from the neighboring countries of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. 480,000 of them were estimated to be stateless, while 100,000 of them were refugees and asylum seekers. According to the Global Slavery Index, which we looked at in lectures, Thailand ranks as number one in terms of human trafficking and is home to about 610,000 human trafficking victims. In terms of what traffickers look for, traffickers in Thailand predominantly target children from poor rural backgrounds, women to be trafficked into the sex tourism industry, as prostitution is legal within Thailand, and men are trafficked within the fishing industry. Thailand functions as a combination of all three: source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking. It serves as a destination country for economic migrants coming from less economically developed neighboring countries. Many citizens are tricked into migrating into Thailand for higher pay and better quality of living, which usually does not turn out to be the case. There are four major sectors of the Thai economy, which are fishing, construction, commercial agriculture, and domestic work. All four of these sectors rely heavily on undocumented migrants and children as cheap laborers. Thailand has a very complex system of legal migration. Migrants have to go through a MOU process, which stands for Memorandum of Understandings. MOU, in short, is a legal agreement between the governments of Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar that establishes a channel for legal labor migration from these countries into Thailand. Due to this complex, long, and rather expensive process, many migrant workers choose to use illegal channels to be able to enter and work in Thailand instead. On top of this, another reason why Thailand has so many illegal migrant workers is due to the fact that it can be really expensive to apply for passports in countries such as Myanmar. For many people that are struggling to even keep food on the table, this seems almost impossible. As a result, these illegal channels are used. Many of these immigrants, when landed in Thailand, are particularly vulnerable to labor exploitation from the lack of legal protection as a legal migrant, and are oftentimes subjected to conditions of forced labor. As a destination country, Thailand's trafficking victims can be split into two groups: economic migrants who enter willingly, lured solely by the promise of better working opportunities, while others are forcibly abducted and brought there against their will. These migrants are very likely and easily subjected to abusive conditions. As a source country, the main destinations for Thai victims, the majority of whom are women, include the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, South Africa, Australia, and Japan. Among these countries, Japan is considered the biggest market for Thai migrants. Many laborers, especially women, are trafficked overseas, and they oftentimes find themselves in a debt bondage. This is due to the fact that they are required to pay a hefty pre-departure recruitment fee, which creates a debt that they have to pay back through their involuntary labor. The Thai migrant workers are victims of labor abuses such as excessive work hours, low wages, and unsafe working environments. Thailand is also used as a transit zone for sex trafficking and forced labor by many of the more developed countries in the West. Bangkok, which is the capital of Thailand, is a very popular transit hub for traffickers. There is something known as the Golden Triangle, which is the region where the borders of Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos connect. It is a major hotspot for illegal border trade, which includes human trafficking. Traffickers transport their victims through established migration routes along Thailand's long borders or along the sea. They're aided by coastal communities and corrupt authorities, so they can use fishing ports and sea channels that are difficult for Thai authorities to monitor. Thailand is also the very center of Southeast Asia, which makes it a very convenient location for traffickers to transport victims to other countries. For this reason, Bangkok is the hub for many Chinese human traffickers who transport captives and illegal migrants from Thailand to destinations around the world. Sex trafficking victims from Pakistan, Vietnam, North Korea, and Bangladesh have been identified as having passed through Thailand while they're en route to Western Europe, Singapore, the United States, and Russia. Forced labor and sexual exploitation are the two major forms of human trafficking in Thailand. The sex trade is common in Thailand's largest tourist cities where prostitution is legal. Prostitution is a normalized part of society in Thailand and maintains a significant presence in the country as a result of police corruption and economic reliance. In Thailand, those in prostitution do not face the same degree of stigmatization present in other countries. This tolerance is partially due to the money generated in the sex industry for the country, and it also results from poverty, low levels of education, and a lack of employment in rural areas. Social media platforms and online chat rooms have emerged as key centers of recruitment for human traffickers in Thailand. The internet allows traffickers to have instant access to thousands of vulnerable victims around the world, desperate to earn better wages and escape from poverty. These victims are lured in by false promises of employment, and then they are exploited. Games and quote-unquote fun websites are used to reach younger victims who are then blackmailed to perform sex acts. Child prostitution, without a doubt, is a major problem in Thailand, as 40,000 children under the age of 16 are believed to be in the sex trade, working in clubs, bars, and brothels. Sex trafficked victims are then threatened and experience physical and psychological trauma. They also often contract STDs from rapes and suffer from abuse and malnutrition. As a result of the increase in urbanization around the world and in Thailand, so does the demand for cheap labor and human trafficking. Thailand is the world's largest seafood exporter, with exports valued at about 6.5 billion USD annually. Thailand's fishing industry is filled with trafficking and abuse. Many reports since the year 2000 have documented the forced labor of trafficked workers in the Thai fishing industry. Thousands of migrants have been forced to work on fishing boats with no contract or stable wages, the majority of these migrants being from neighboring countries. In its 2014 Trafficking in Persons report, the U.S. State Department downgraded Thailand to a Tier 3 trafficking nation designation as a result of the indication that Thailand had not done enough to curb the ongoing problems of human trafficking in a number of industries in its country, including its fishing and seafood industry. Thailand faced a lot of pressure from NGOs around the world that published very graphic reports of the poor treatment of workers on Thai fishing boats. Many workers from neighboring countries were conned getting into the boats and then forced into what some call, and what we have discussed heavily in class, as modern-day slavery. This would include beatings, physical restraint, and even sometimes murder. In its 2022 TIP report, the U.S. Department of State ranks Thailand as a Tier 2 watchlist country. While Thailand does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of human trafficking, the Thai government has made significant steps towards it by actively implementing legislation against it. The government of Thailand is slowly increasing the programs and budgets for help centers, introducing more severe judicial penalties and labor restrictions. They are also assigning advanced training to court personnel, prosecutors, and law enforcement. However, a lot of corruption exists among Thai police, and the exclusion of immigrants and sex workers from legislation remain two major obstacles to combating the trafficking problem in Thailand. The Palermo Protocol is a protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. The protocol was adopted by the United Nations in November of 2000, and 90% of the world has signed on to it. Thailand ratified the Palermo Protocol on October 17, 2013. By its ratification, Thailand became the 179th party to the convention. Taken from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Kingdom of Thailand made a commitment by ratifying the protocol to adopt the legislative and other necessary measures to establish the conduct of trafficking persons when committed intentionally as criminal offenses to protect the privacy and identity of victims of trafficking in persons, including by making legal proceedings related to such trafficking confidential, to provide for the physical, psychological, and social recovery of victims of trafficking in persons, and to facilitate the return of victims of trafficking on persons to their country of origin. Unlike many other countries, Thailand does not have any reservations or declarations for the protocol. Thailand still struggles heavily in combating human trafficking. It was reported that in 2020, the Thai government initiated significantly fewer trafficking investigations, prosecuted fewer suspects, and convicted fewer traffickers than in 2019. Despite many global reports that forced labor was very prevalent among migrant workers in many industries in Thailand, the Thai government identified a very low number of labor trafficking victims compared to the severity of the problem. Thai officials often lack an understanding of labor trafficking, and the government lacks standard procedures for labor inspectors to refer potential cases to law enforcement. There are many obstacles in tackling trafficking in persons in Thailand, one being fear of prosecution amongst victims and survivors, but also corruption and the lack of investigation or prosecution. In terms of protection, there isn't a lot being done. The Thai government decreased efforts to identify and protect victims. Officials identified significantly fewer victims in 2020 than in previous years, as stated before. The government identified 230 trafficking victims in 2020 compared to 868 victims in 2019 and 631 in 2018. The Thai government only permitted foreign victims who held a valid visa or work permit at the time of their identification to stay outside of government shelters during legal proceedings against their traffickers. Undocumented foreign victims of trafficking were sometimes required to remain in government shelters while the government processed applications for permits to temporarily stay and work in Thailand. In some cases, after these permits were approved, victims were still required to stay in government shelters. The Multidisciplinary Team, also known as MDT, which is made up of government agencies and NGOs, utilized standard screening guidelines to formally identify victims and refer them to services. Effective implementation of identification procedures by MDTs continues to be extremely inconsistent throughout Thailand's 77 provinces. This is due to a lack of understanding of trafficking among some officials. Section 29 of the anti-trafficking law requires officials to take suspected trafficking victims into the government's custody for no more than 24 hours, or sometimes up to 8 days with the permission of a court. During this period, multidisciplinary teams, also known as MDTs, conduct victim identification interviews, and formal identification by MDTs is necessary for victims to obtain a legal right to services, including access to the government's trafficking shelters. This is a very big barrier for some victims who are not physically or psychologically prepared to undergo the MDT identification process in order to obtain services. On the contrary, a problem that exists for those who do not need access to the shelter is that these victims are often required to stay in shelters until the completion of proceedings or advanced testimony against their traffickers, even in cases in which they need to exit the shelter system as a result of psychological or physical issues. The Thai government did create working groups to consider a reflection period for victims and institutionalize a police division dedicated to combating the online sexual exploitation of children. However, in terms of protection of human trafficking victims, there are a lot of problems that still exist today. To name a few, most victims do not have access to cell phones or their personal belongings once they enter into these shelters. They sometimes need to obtain special permission in order to make monitored personal calls. There is also just not enough funding going into these shelters. There's a huge lack of on-site psychologists and staff trained on trauma-informed care. The government heavily restricts victims' freedom of movement, and victims of trafficking from other countries who entered willingly for work are oftentimes not granted citizenship, and many face deportation. It can be concluded that human trafficking is a major problem in Thailand, with the industry being worth around 12 billion USD according to the International Labour Organization. There is no doubt that Thailand is a major center for global human trafficking. Thai workers are trafficked to countries all around the world, and cheap labor is trafficked in from neighboring countries. In order to combat this problem, a lot more must be done. Of course, there has been progress in reducing the human trafficking trade in recent years with the help from NGOs around the world. However, in order to make a truly meaningful and widespread impact, the efforts of these NGOs need to be aided by increased government action. This action is absolutely essential to protect Thai citizens and migrant workers.